now that humanity can cheaply go beyond Earth orbit and go and land on the moon safely and cheaply. And suddenly the applications that people have not even thought about that will become possible. Just like when iPhone first came out and they said, let's open an application store. If you were to ask people before that happened, what would you do with that application store? I don't think anybody would have possibly guessed the number one thing people are going to do on the iPhone are going to be throwing the birds at the pigs, right? But that's what the thing was. Angry Birds was the number one thing what people did, right? So to me, the tipping point happens when you are able to see what can be done by someone else. So it becomes one of those problems. The tipping point will happen when the first private company goes out and does something so audacious, so that is never possible before. And that tipping point will allow everyone else behind them to create many of the applications that we have thought about or have not even thought about, right?
So and the way of asking this question is for the smartphone. It was pretty clear to see that tipping point was appeared when the smartphone was introduced. But if we want to make the analogy to space, what's the equivalent?
I honestly believe going beyond the Earth orbit and showing people that now we have a technology and the tools at our disposal that a small group of people can go out and, under $50 billion, if you can show people you can land on the moon, it shows everything else is at that point becomes accessible to you.
I think there have been a few tipping points in space, and it doesn't even need to be an analogy. The smartphone itself was a tipping point in space. The smartphone revolution, just the ability to condense electronics down to such a small size and weight and a compact payload to do a similar amount of science to something that before was so much larger. That alone has enabled a lot of cheaper access for companies to space. I also think that there's a multitude of different tipping points coming up. One, certainly when private industry lands on the moon, when commercial suborbital space flights assume commercial operations, when inflatable space stations host the first sovereignties in space. These are all, when the first asteroid is mined and suddenly $50 billion in resources is opened up from one rock. I mean, these are all moments that open up a whole slew of ancillary industries, and I think each one of them is a different tipping point. Like any other industry, this one is quite diverse. There are services on the ground all the way up to beyond low Earth orbit, certainly to the moon, and even beyond cislunar space, there are aspirations. So I think there's quite a few tipping points, but to put a time frame on it, I would say the next few years. In the next few